Every woman fears the moment when love turns to betrayal before her very eyes. Lady Evelyne lived that nightmare as her groom fled their wedding, leaving her humiliated at the altar while hundreds watched. Standing alone in her wedding dress, she thought her life was over. Then a voice cut through the whispers. "She's mine now." Lord Thorne stepped from the shadows, claiming her as his bride. What started as a rescue became something darker and more beautiful than she ever imagined. 30 years have passed. Evelyne has learned the truth about her mysterious husband and discovered powers within herself she never knew existed. Now she faces her biggest choice yet: stay in his immortal world or leave forever. But can a woman who has tasted eternity ever truly walk away? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of her wedding day had dawned with the kind of crisp autumn light that made everything seem possible. Lady Evelyne Ashford stood before the tall mirror in her family's modest manner, watching her lady's maid, Sarah, make final adjustments to the ivory silk gown that had belonged to her grandmother. The dress was beautiful in its simplicity, no excessive beadwork or elaborate trains that marked the gowns of wealthier families. Instead, it spoke of quiet dignity and timeless grace. "You look radiant, my lady," Sarah whispered, her weathered hands gentle as she arranged the delicate lace veil. "Lord Garrett is a fortunate man indeed." Evelyne smiled, though something fluttered uneasily in her chest. She had known Edmund Garrett since childhood. Their families' lands bordered each other, and their union would strengthen both estates. He was kind enough, handsome in a boyish way, and would provide her with security. Yet, as she gazed at her reflection, she wondered if this was truly what she wanted from life. "Is my sister ready?" Evelyne asked, needing the comfort of Margaret's presence. "Lady Margaret is overseeing the final preparations in the Great Hall," Sarah replied. "She wants everything perfect for you." Margaret had always been the protective one, 3 years older and infinitely more worldly. Where Evelyne dreamed of poetry and distant lands, Margaret focused on practical matters: dowries, alliances, and the careful navigation of noble society. It was Margaret who had negotiated the terms of Evelyne's marriage, ensuring her sister would be well cared for. The Ashford family carriage waited outside, decorated with white roses and trailing ribbons. As Evelyne stepped into the crisp morning air, she noticed the servants exchanging glances. There had been whispers lately, strange stories about Lord Thorne, the mysterious nobleman who owned the vast estate beyond the eastern woods. Some said he never attended church. Others claimed his servants were seen only at night. The cook swore she had seen him walking his grounds during the full moon, his cloak billowing despite the absence of wind. But these were likely just tales born of idle gossip. Lord Thorne rarely ventured into society, and mystery breeds imagination among common folk. Still, Evelyne found herself glancing toward the eastern horizon as the carriage rolled through the countryside toward St. Bartholomew's Cathedral. The cathedral stood like a magnificent stone guardian against the autumn sky, its twin spires reaching toward heaven, while intricate flying buttresses supported walls that had witnessed centuries of prayer, celebration, and sorrow. Ancient oak doors, carved with scenes from Scripture, stood open to welcome the wedding guests. Inside, dozens of tall candles cast dancing shadows across stone columns, while stained glass windows painted the nave in jeweled light. Margaret had spared no expense in decorating the sacred space. White lilies and autumn roses adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the sweet smoke of incense. The wooden pews, polished to a warm glow, were filled with representatives from neighboring estates. Ladies in their finest silks whispered behind painted fans, while gentlemen in dark velvet discussed matters of land and politics. Father Benedict, a kindly priest who had served the parish for 40 years, waited at the altar. His lined face bore the wisdom of age and the compassion of one who had guided countless souls through life's most sacred moments. He had baptized both Evelyne and Edmund, and it seemed fitting that he should now unite them in marriage. As the ceremony hour approached, Evelyne noticed Edmund's growing pallor. He stood near the altar, tugging at his collar and glancing repeatedly toward the doors. His best man, Sir William, whispered words of encouragement, but Edmund's hands trembled as he adjusted his sword belt. "Perhaps he's merely nervous," Margaret murmured as she helped Evelyne arrange her train. All grooms feel anxiety on their wedding day, but this seemed different. Edmund's eyes held a wildness that spoke of something deeper than wedding nerves. When their gazes met across the cathedral, he quickly looked away, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. The organ began its processional melody, the rich notes echoing off stone walls as Evelyne began her walk down the aisle. Each step carried her toward a future she had accepted rather than chosen, yet she held her head high with the grace her mother had taught her. The congregation rose as one, their faces turned toward her with expressions of approval and anticipation. Halfway down the aisle, she noticed him. In the shadows of the north transept, partially hidden behind a massive stone column, stood a figure that commanded attention despite his attempt at concealment. Lord Thorne was taller than she had imagined, with dark hair that caught the candlelight and features that spoke of aristocratic breeding. But it was his eyes that arrested her pale grey, almost silver, and focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a long cloak of deepest black, lined with crimson silk that flashed when he moved. Everything about him suggested power held in careful restraint, like a sword resting in its sheath. The stories had not exaggerated his presence. He was indeed a man apart from ordinary society. Why was he here? Lord Thorne never attended social gatherings, yet here he stood in their cathedral, watching her wedding with those unsettling eyes. A shiver ran down Evelyne's spine, though whether from fear or something else entirely, she could not say. Edmund was waiting at the altar, but his face had grown even paler. His hands shook visibly now, and he kept glancing toward the transept where Lord Thorne stood. When Father Benedict asked him to step forward, Edmund stumbled slightly, catching himself on the altar rail. "Dearly beloved," Father Benedict began, his voice carrying clearly through the sacred space, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and these witnesses to unite Lord Edmund Garrett and Lady Evelyne Ashford in holy matrimony." The familiar words should have brought comfort, but tension crackled through the cathedral like lightning before a storm. Evelyne could feel Lord Thorne's gaze upon her, though she dared not look in his direction again. Edmund swayed slightly, and Sir William moved closer to steady him. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly or carelessly, but reverently and in the fear of God," Father Benedict continued. "If any person present knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence stretched long enough for Evelyne to hear her own heartbeat. Then, suddenly, Edmund lurched backward. "I cannot," he gasped, his voice carrying across the stunned cathedral. "I cannot do this." A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Ladies reached for their smelling salts, while gentlemen leaned forward in shock. Margaret's face went white with horror. "Edmund?" Evelyne whispered, reaching toward him, but he was already backing away from the altar. "Forgive me," he called out, his voice breaking with panic. "I cannot marry her. I cannot." And then he was running, his wedding finery streaming behind him as he fled down the center aisle and out through the great doors. The oak panels slammed shut behind him with a sound like thunder, leaving the cathedral in stunned silence. Evelyne stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet trembling in her hands. 300 pairs of eyes fixed upon her with expressions ranging from shock to pity to barely concealed satisfaction at witnessing such scandal. The white silk gown that had seemed so beautiful now felt like a costume mocking her humiliation. She could hear the whispers beginning soft at first, then growing bolder as the reality of what had happened sank in. The Ashford name would be forever tainted by this moment. No respectable family would consider alliance with them now. Edmund's cowardice had not only broken her heart, but destroyed her future. Margaret started to rise, her face a mask of protective fury. But before she could reach the altar, a voice cut through the murmuring crowd with the authority of a blade through silk. "She's mine now." The words echoed off the stone walls with such commanding presence that every whisper died instantly. Lord Thorne stepped from the shadows, his black cloak billowing behind him as he strode down the center aisle. The congregation turned to watch his approach, some crossing themselves, others shrinking back in their pews, as if his very presence might somehow contaminate them. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step deliberate and measured. The crimson lining of his cloak flashed like blood in the candlelight, and his pale eyes never left Evelyne's face. When he reached the altar, he extended one gloved hand toward her with the courtesy of a true gentleman. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of the highest nobility, "if you will have me." Father Benedict sputtered in confusion. "My lord, this is most irregular." "Is it?" Lord Thorne's gaze fixed on the priest with quiet authority. "The lady requires a husband. I offer myself as such. Surely God's house is the proper place for such a union." Evelyne stared at the offered hand, her mind reeling. Here was salvation from scandal, rescue from social ruin. Yet something in Lord Thorne's eyes suggested this was far more than mere chivalry. He looked at her as if he had been waiting his entire life for this moment. She began, but her voice failed. "The choice is yours alone, my lady," he said softly, his words meant for her ears only. "But choose quickly, for time is not our ally." In the distance, she could hear Edmund's horse galloping away from the cathedral, carrying her former life with him. Behind her, the congregation waited in breathless anticipation for her response. Margaret's face showed a mixture of relief and concern, grateful for the rescue, but uncertain of its cost. Evelyne looked into Lord Thorne's silver eyes and saw something that Edmund had never offered certainty. This man knew exactly what he wanted, and for reasons she could not fathom, he wanted her. She placed her trembling hand in his gloved one. The moment their fingers touched, she felt a jolt of electricity that seemed to run through her very bones. Lord Thorne's lips curved in a slight smile, as if he had felt it too, and he led her back to face Father Benedict. "Proceed with the ceremony," he commanded, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. And so, in a cathedral filled with shocked witnesses and dancing shadows, Lady Evelyne Ashford married a man whose very presence seemed to bend reality around him. As Father Benedict spoke the ancient words of binding, she wondered if she was being rescued or claimed, and whether there might be a difference between the two. The ring Lord Thorne slipped onto her finger was unlike anything she had ever seen, silver so pure it seemed to glow with inner light, set with a stone that shifted color like captured starlight. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. When the ceremony concluded and Lord Thorne lifted her veil to kiss her, the cathedral fell into absolute silence. His lips were cool against hers, but the kiss held a promise of warmth to come. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Evelyne caught sight of her reflection in one of the great windows. She looked different already, no longer the abandoned bride, but someone else entirely, someone whose story was just beginning. The carriage ride to Thorne Manor passed in contemplative silence, broken only by the rhythmic clip of hooves on cobblestone and the soft rustle of Lord Thorne's crimson-lined cloak. Evelyne sat across from her new husband, stealing glances at his profile as afternoon shadows lengthened across the countryside. The man who had claimed her so dramatically now seemed lost in thought, his silver eyes focused on some distant point beyond the carriage window. She twisted the strange ring on her finger, still marveling at how perfectly it fit. The stone within seemed to pulse with its own light, shifting from deep blue to violet as it caught the changing daylight. When she had asked about its origins, Lord Thorne had simply said it belonged to her now, as if that explained everything. "Are you having second thoughts, my lady?" His voice startled her from her reverie. "Should I be?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "An honest question deserves an honest answer. Your life will be very different now. Some might say I have done you no favor." "And what would you say?" He turned to face her fully, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "I would say that Edmund Garrett was a fool to run from such a treasure. His loss has become my greatest fortune." Heat rose in her cheeks at the compliment, yet something in his tone suggested layers of meaning she could not yet decipher. Before she could respond, the carriage turned through massive iron gates, topped with strange symbols she did not recognize. Ancient oak trees lined the drive, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the remaining daylight. Thorne Manor rose before them like something from a fairy tale, or perhaps a cautionary tale. The Gothic architecture spoke of centuries past, with tall spires and arched windows that seemed to watch their approach. Ivy clung to the dark stone walls, and gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof as if ready to take flight. Everything about the place whispered of secrets and stories untold. "Welcome to your new home, Lord Thorne," said, stepping down from the carriage and offering her his hand. The moment her feet touched the ground, she felt a strange sensation, as if the very earth beneath the manor recognized her presence. The feeling was so startling that she nearly stumbled, but Lord Thorne's steady grip kept her upright. "The manor has been waiting a long time for a lady's touch," he said, and again she sensed hidden meanings in his words. The great hall was magnificent, in a way that spoke of power accumulated over generations. Tapestries depicting scenes of medieval hunts and battles adorned the walls, while suits of armor stood silent guard in shadowed alcoves. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel carved with the same mysterious symbols she had noticed on the gates. Candles flickered in iron chandeliers, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their flames. What struck her most, however, was the absence of mirrors. In her family's manor, every room held looking glasses to catch and reflect whatever light was available. Here, she saw none, only dark wood and stone surfaces that absorbed rather than reflected the candlelight. "My lord," she began, but he raised a hand. "Adrian," he corrected, "we are husband and wife now. Surely we can dispense with titles in private." "Adrian," she repeated, testing the name. It suited him, ancient and noble, with an edge of mystery. "I was wondering about the household staff. Will I meet them tonight?" Something flickered across his features too quick for her to interpret. "The staff prefer to work at night. You will meet them tomorrow evening. For now, let me show you to your chambers." He led her up a grand staircase carved from black oak, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow their progress. Some of the paintings were so old that the details had faded into shadows, yet she could still make out the pale eyes that seemed to be a family trait. One portrait in particular caught her attention, a woman with dark hair and features remarkably similar to her own. "Who is she?" Evelyne asked, pausing before the painting. Adrian stopped beside her, his expression unreadable. "Someone who lived here long ago. The resemblance is striking, is it not?" "How long ago?" "Time moves differently in this place," he said, which was no answer at all. "Come, you must be tired." The chamber he showed her to was larger than any room she had ever occupied. Rich velvet curtains in deep burgundy framed tall windows, while a four-poster bed dominated the center of the space. Fresh flowers had been arranged on the dressing table, white roses and ivy that filled the room with their sweet fragrance. Despite the luxury, something felt strange about the space, though she could not quite identify what. "I hope you will be comfortable here," Adrian said from the doorway. "My chambers are just beyond that door, should you have need of anything." She nodded, suddenly aware of How little she knew about the expectations of marriage. Her mother had died when she was 12, and Margaret's hurried advice that morning had focused more on enduring than enjoying the marriage bed. "Adrian?" she called as he turned to leave. "Yes? Thank you. For what you did today. You saved me from more than just embarrassment." He studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps, my dear Evelyne, it was I who was saved." With that cryptic statement, he bowed formally and withdrew, leaving her alone in the vast chamber. She moved to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains, looking out over grounds that stretched to a dark forest beyond. The moon was rising, nearly full, and its light transformed the landscape into something ethereal and strange. As she watched, a figure emerged from the tree line, tall and graceful, moving across the grounds with purpose. Even at this distance, she recognized Adrian's distinctive silhouette. But what was he doing, walking the grounds at this hour? And why did his movement seem so fluid, almost as if his feet barely touched the ground? She leaned closer to the glass, trying to get a better view, but clouds passed over the moon, plunging the grounds into darkness. When the light returned, the figure was gone. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see a maid with water for washing. Instead, a woman entered, carrying a silver tray laden with delicate china. She was perhaps 40 years of age, with prematurely white hair and the palest skin Evelyne had ever seen. Her movements held the same fluid grace she had noticed in Adrian, and her dark eyes seemed to hold depths of knowledge. "Good evening, my lady. I am Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. I thought you might like some refreshment." "That's very kind." Evelyne watched as the woman poured tea from an ornate silver service. The liquid was dark red, almost burgundy, and gave off an unusual aroma, metallic and rich. "What type of tea is this?" "A special blend, my lady. It will help you sleep peacefully in your new home." Something in the woman's tone made Evelyne hesitate. "I'm not particularly tired. Perhaps just water?" Mrs. Whitmore's smile never wavered, but her eyes seemed to grow colder. "As you wish, my lady. Though I should mention that Lord Thorne specifically requested this blend for you. He is quite particular about such things." The implication was clear. Refusing might cause offense. Evelyne accepted the delicate cup, noting how the liquid seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. She brought it to her lips and took a small sip. The taste was unlike anything she had ever experienced, rich and warm, with an undertone she could not identify. It seemed to spread through her body like liquid fire, warming her from within and making her feel strangely energized rather than sleepy. "Excellent," Mrs. Whitmore murmured, watching her reaction carefully. "I shall leave the pot here, should you desire more. Lord Thorne will be pleased to know you found it agreeable." After the housekeeper departed, Evelyne examined herself in the looking-glass above the dressing table, the only mirror she had seen in the manor. Her reflection seemed different somehow, more vivid than before. Her eyes appeared brighter. Her skin seemed to glow with new vitality. Perhaps it was simply the excitement of the day or the effect of the strange tea. As she prepared for bed, slipping into a silk nightgown that had been laid out for her, she found herself thinking about the events that had led her here. This morning she had been Lady Evelyne Ashford, preparing to marry a man she barely knew out of duty. Tonight she was Lady Evelyne Thorne, wed to a man who remained an enigma, but who had shown her more passion in a single glance than Edmund had in years of acquaintance. She blew out the candles and climbed into the massive bed, pulling the heavy coverlets up to her chin. The mattress was softer than anything she had ever experienced, and the pillows smelled of lavender and something else, something wild and intoxicating. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of her new home, she became aware of music drifting up from somewhere below. It was hauntingly beautiful, a melody that seemed to speak directly to her soul. Unable to resist, she rose and moved to the window. In the courtyard below, Adrian stood beneath the moonlight, his head tilted back, as if listening to something she could not hear. The music seemed to emanate from him, though she saw no instrument. As she watched, Mesmerized, he began to move in what could only be described as a dance, graceful, fluid, and utterly hypnotic. Then, as if sensing her presence, he looked up directly at her window. Even across the distance, she could see his eyes gleaming like silver fire in the moonlight. He smiled and bowed formally, as if acknowledging her as his audience. When she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the fading echo of impossible music and the certainty that her life had changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. The crimson cloak she had seen him wear at their wedding hung in her wardrobe now, though she did not remember him placing it there. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself wondering what other impossibilities awaited her in this ancient manor, and whether she would have the courage to face them when they revealed themselves. Evelyne woke to find sunlight streaming through heavy curtains, though she could not recall opening them the night before. Her body felt refreshed in a way that seemed almost unnatural, as if she had slept for days rather than hours. The strange tea's effects lingered, leaving her with an energy that hummed through her veins like electricity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "My lady?" came Mrs. Whitmore's voice through the door. "May I enter?" "Please do." The housekeeper entered, carrying a breakfast tray, her pale features serene in the morning light. Today, she wore a dress of deep grey that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. "Lord Thorne hopes you slept well. He has been called away on urgent business, but will return this evening." "What sort of business?" Evelyne asked, accepting the tray. The breakfast was elegant: fresh bread, butter, preserves, and what appeared to be fruit juice in a crystal goblet. "Estate matters, my lady. Lord Thorne's holdings are quite extensive." Mrs. Whitmore moved about the room with that same fluid grace, straightening things that did not appear to need straightening. "He asked me to show you about the manor today, so you might become familiar with your new home." The juice was unlike anything Evelyne had tasted, sweet and tart simultaneously, with an underlying richness that reminded her of the previous night's tea. She found herself draining the goblet quickly, surprised by her sudden thirst. "Excellent," Mrs. Whitmore murmured, watching her drink. "Lord Thorne will be pleased. Now, shall we begin your tour?" The manor proved to be even more vast than Evelyne had imagined. Corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors and tapestries depicting scenes she could not quite decipher in the shifting candlelight. Mrs. Whitmore led her through drawing rooms furnished with furniture that spoke of centuries rather than decades. Past libraries filled with books whose titles were written in languages she did not recognize. "How long has the Thorne family lived here?" Evelyne asked as they paused in what Mrs. Whitmore called the music room. A magnificent harpsichord dominated the space, its surface polished to mirror brightness, the first reflective surface she had seen in the manor. "The Thorne bloodline has held these lands since before memory, my lady. The first stones of this manor were laid when your ancestors were still learning to work iron." The statement was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took Evelyne a moment to process its implications. That would make the manor older than the cathedral. Indeed, much older. Mrs. Whitmore's fingers traced the edge of the harpsichord. "Do you play, my lady?" "A little. My mother taught me before she died. Perhaps you might play for Lord Thorne tonight. He has a great appreciation for music." They continued their tour through rooms that seemed designed for entertaining, yet Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that Lord Thorne rarely received guests. When Evelyne asked why, the housekeeper's expression grew carefully neutral. "Lord Thorne values his privacy, my lady. The outside world can be quite demanding, and he prefers the tranquility of his estate." They paused before a set of ornate double doors, carved with intricate symbols, similar to those Evelyne had noticed throughout the manor. Mrs. Whitmore's hand rested on the handle, but she did not open them. "What lies beyond?" Evelyne asked. "Lord Thorne's private study. He prefers that room remain undisturbed in his absence." Something in the housekeeper's tone suggested this was more than mere preference. It was an absolute rule. Evelyne found herself staring at the carved symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. They seemed familiar somehow, as if she had seen them in dreams or half-remembered stories. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask how long you have served Lord Thorne?" The woman's pale eyes grew distant. "Time moves strangely in this house, my lady. I have been here longer than I can precisely recall." Before Evelyne could pursue this cryptic answer, they were interrupted by the arrival of another servant, a tall, thin man with the same pale complexion and dark eyes as Mrs. Whitmore. He moved with that characteristic fluid grace, approaching them with silent steps. 18. "My lady, this is Thomas, our groundskeeper," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Thomas, Lady Thorne." The man bowed formally, but his eyes never quite met hers. "My lady, Lord Thorne asked me to present you with this." He held out a small velvet box, and when Evelyne opened it, she gasped. Inside lay a pendant unlike anything she had ever seen, a moonstone of exceptional size and clarity, set in silver that seemed to glow with inner light. The stone itself appeared almost liquid, shifting and changing like captured moonbeams. "It belonged to the lady of the manor before you," Thomas said softly. "Lord Thorne wishes you to have it." "Before me? But I thought Lord Thorne had never married." Mrs. Whitmore and Thomas exchanged a glance that lasted perhaps a second too long. "The pendant has been in the family for generations, my lady," Mrs. Whitmore said smoothly. "It traditionally belongs to the lady of the house." As Evelyne lifted the pendant from its box, the stone seemed to pulse with warmth against her palm. The moment she clasped it around her neck, she felt a strange sensation, as if something dormant within her had awakened. The world seemed suddenly more vivid, colors more intense, and she could swear she heard whispers in the walls around her. "Beautiful, Mrs." Whitmore murmured, studying Evelyne's face carefully. "It suits you perfectly, as Lord Thorne knew it would." They completed the tour with visits to the conservatory, where exotic plants grew in impossible abundance despite the approaching winter, and the orangery, where fruit trees bore blossoms and ripe fruit simultaneously. Everything about Thorne Manor seemed to exist outside the normal laws of nature and time. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Mrs. Whitmore showed Evelyne to the library, a vast room lined with books from floor to ceiling. Ancient volumes bound in leather and newer texts in languages she recognized competed for space on the endless shelves. The air smelled of parchment and ink, with an underlying scent of something else, something wild and untamed. "Lord Thorne thought you might enjoy reading while he is away," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Feel free to explore any volume that catches your interest." Left alone among the books, Evelyne found herself drawn to a particular section where the volumes seemed older and more mysterious than the rest. One book in particular called to her, a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather, its title written in silver script that seemed to shimmer as she read, "The Secret History of Night." She opened it to a random page and found herself reading about creatures of legend, beings who walked between the world of mortals and something else entirely. The prose was beautiful, almost hypnotic, and she found herself reading passage after passage about transformations, eternal love, and the price of immortality. When she finally looked up, she was startled to discover that darkness had fallen completely. Candles had been lit throughout the library, though she had not heard anyone enter. The moonstone pendant around her neck glowed softly in the candlelight, and she realized she felt more energized than ever. Despite having spent hours reading, a sound from the corridor caught her attention, footsteps that seemed to glide across the stone floors rather than strike them. Her heart quickened as she recognized the rhythm of Adrian's gait. He was returning home. She closed the book and rose, smoothing her skirts and checking her appearance in the window's reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different again, more vibrant, more alive. The pendant rested perfectly at the hollow of her throat, the moonstone catching and holding the candlelight as if it were made of captured starfire. When Adrian appeared in the library doorway, his silver eyes immediately fixed on the pendant around her neck. A smile played at his lips, satisfied, almost relieved. "I see Thomas delivered my gift," he said, moving toward her with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize. "How do you find it?" "It's beautiful. But Adrian, I must ask who wore it before me?" He reached out to touch the pendant, his fingers brushing against her throat in a way that made her breath catch. "Someone who understood its significance. As I believe you will, given time." "What significance?" "That, my dear wife, is a conversation for another evening. For now, I am simply grateful to see you wearing it." His fingers lingered at her throat for a moment longer before he stepped back. "Have you dined?" "Not yet. I became lost in your books. Excellent reading material, I trust." She thought of the strange volume about creatures of night and transformation. "Educational." His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed somehow sharper than she remembered. "Education is the foundation of all enlightenment. Come, let us dine. I have much to tell you about your new life here." As they left the library together, Evelyne touched the moonstone pendant and wondered what exactly she was being prepared to learn. Dinner with Adrian proved to be unlike any meal Evelyne had ever experienced. The dining room was intimate despite its grandeur, lit by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows across the dark wood paneling. Adrian had changed into evening attire that made him appear even more aristocratic, a deep burgundy jacket that complemented his pale complexion and brought out the silver in his eyes. What struck her most was his dining habits. While she enjoyed roasted fowl and autumn vegetables prepared with herbs from the manor's gardens, Adrian seemed to subsist entirely on wine, a rich, dark vintage that caught the candlelight like liquid rubies. When she commented on his lack of appetite, he smiled and claimed he had dined earlier while conducting his business. "Tell me about your family's holdings," she said, cutting a delicate bite of meat. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned they are extensive. The Thorne lands stretch far beyond what you can see from the manor windows," he replied, swirling the wine in his goblet. "We have interests in shipping, mining, and various other enterprises that require careful attention." "And you manage all of this yourself?" "I have capable associates who handle day-to-day operations. My role is more supervisory." His eyes fixed on her face as she ate, watching each movement with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. "You seem to have quite an appetite this evening." She paused, suddenly aware that she had indeed eaten more than usual. The food tasted extraordinary, each flavor more vivid and complex than anything she remembered from her family's table. "Everything is delicious. Your cook is very talented." "Mrs. Whitmore oversees all household affairs, including the kitchen. She has a particular gift for knowing exactly what people need." He leaned back in his chair, still cradling the wine goblet. "I trust you found the pendant to your liking?" Her hand moved instinctively to the moonstone at her throat. Since putting it on, she had felt remarkably energetic and alert, as if her senses had been sharpened. "It's beautiful, but I'm curious about its history. You mentioned someone wore it before me. Many ladies of this house have worn it over the centuries. It has a way of choosing its proper owner." "Choosing? Surely you've noticed how perfectly it fits, how natural it feels around your neck. Some jewelry is merely decorative. This pendant serves a higher purpose." Before she could ask what purpose, Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway with her characteristic silent approach. "My lord, forgive the interruption, but you have a visitor." Adrian's expression grew sharp. "At this hour?" "Sir William, my lord. He says the matter is urgent." Evelyne recognized the name Edmund's best man from the wedding that seemed like a lifetime ago. What could possibly bring him to Thorne Manor so soon after the scandal? "Show him to the study," Adrian said, rising from his chair. "Evelyne, my dear, perhaps you would retire. To the music room? This shouldn't take long." She wanted to protest, to understand what urgent business could involve her former life, but something in Adrian's tone suggested this was not a request. As she made her way to the music room, she couldn't help but wonder what Sir William might want to discuss with her new husband. The music room felt different at night. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, casting silver patterns across the polished harpsichord. She seated herself at the instrument and began playing a piece her mother had taught her, a haunting melody that seemed particularly suited to the shadowed room. As her fingers moved across the keys, she became aware that the pendant around her neck was growing warm. The moonstone seemed to pulse in rhythm with the music, and she found herself playing with a skill she had never possessed before. Her fingers moved with supernatural grace, finding complex harmonies that transformed the simple melody into something transcendent. Lost in the music, she almost didn't notice when voices began rising from the study below. Through the manor's ancient stones, she could hear heated words, though she couldn't make out their meaning. Sir William's voice carried notes of desperation, while Adrian's remained coldly controlled. The argument grew more intense, and suddenly she heard Sir William's voice raised in panic. "You cannot have her. She's not meant for your kind." Your kind? What did that mean? Adrian's response was too quiet to hear, but it seemed to have a profound effect on Sir William, whose voice dropped to frightened whispers. After several more minutes, she heard the heavy front doors open and close, followed by the sound of horse hooves galloping away into the night. When Adrian appeared in the music room doorway a short time later, his expression was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "That was beautiful," he said, moving to stand beside the resect harpsichord. "Your playing has improved remarkably since yesterday." "Adrian, what did Sir William want? Why was he so upset?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers trailing across the instrument's polished surface. "Sir William harbors certain superstitions about my family. Old stories passed down through generations of fearful minds." "What kind of stories?" "The sort that simple people tell to explain what they cannot understand." He turned to face her fully, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. "There are those who believe the Thorne family is cursed or blessed, depending on one's perspective. They whisper that we are not entirely human." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Evelyne felt her heart quicken, though whether from fear or excitement she could not say. "And what do you believe?" "I believe that some bloodlines carry gifts that others find frightening. I believe that power, when properly wielded, allows one to transcend the ordinary limitations of mortal existence." He moved closer, his presence seeming to fill the room. "And I believe that you, my dear Evelyne, were meant to share in such gifts." She stood, her hands trembling slightly. "What are you saying?" "Look at yourself," he said softly. "Look at how you've changed since arriving here. Your senses are sharper, your appetite stronger, your very presence more vibrant. The pendant around your neck glows with inner light, and you play music with skills you never possessed before." As he spoke, she realized he was right. Everything seemed more intense, more vivid since her arrival at Thorne Manor. Colors were richer, sounds clearer, and she felt more alive than she ever had in her previous life. "The transformation has already begun," Adrian continued, reaching out to touch her face with cool fingers. "The question is whether you will embrace it or fight against your true nature." "What transformation?" Instead of answering directly, he moved to a cabinet she hadn't noticed before and withdrew what appeared to be a hand mirror framed in ornate silver. But when he held it up for her to see, she gasped. Her reflection was there, but it seemed wrong somehow. Her skin appeared almost luminous in the moonlight, her eyes brighter than they should be, and when she smiled, her teeth seemed sharper than she remembered. Most unsettling of all, the moonstone pendant around her neck cast no reflection at all. The mirror showed only empty space where it should be. "What is happening to me?" she whispered. "You are becoming what you were always meant to be," Adrian said, setting the mirror aside. "Some are born to ordinary lives, content to age and die within the narrow confines of mortal existence. Others are destined for something far greater. And if I don't want this destiny?" His expression grew sad, almost pitying. My dear Evelyne, the choice was made the moment you accepted my ring. The transformation cannot be stopped, only embraced or feared. I had hoped you would greet your evolution with joy rather than terror. She sank back onto the piano bench, her mind reeling. Everything about her new life suddenly made sense. The strange household staff, the Manor's impossible gardens, Adrian's nocturnal habits, and her own changing nature. She was becoming something other than human. "What am I becoming?" she asked quietly. "Something beautiful, something eternal, something that will never again know the pain of abandonment or the fear of mortality." He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his cool grasp. "I can teach you to control these new abilities, to revel in your enhanced senses, to find joy in your transformation." The moonstone pendant pulsed warm against her throat, and she realized that despite her fear, part of her was intrigued by the possibilities he offered. She thought of her old life, the constant worry about security, the social constraints that limited her freedom, the prospect of gaunt and vest, the growing old and forgotten. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "The physical transformation will be complete within days," Adrian replied. "But accepting your new nature, that is a choice that may take longer." As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Whitmore appeared with a silver tray bearing 2 goblets. This time, Evelyne noticed, both contained the same dark red liquid Adrian preferred. "Your evening refreshment, my lord, my lady," the housekeeper said with a knowing smile. Evelyne stared at the goblet meant for her, understanding instinctively what it contained. This was the moment of no return, the final step in a transformation that had begun the moment she placed her hand in Adrian's at the altar. "The choice is yours," Adrian said softly, "but know that whatever you decide, you will always have a home here, and you will always have my protection." She picked up the goblet, studying the dark liquid within. Tomorrow, she realized, she would no longer be entirely human. The question was whether she would embrace that change or spend eternity fighting against it. The silver hand mirror lay on the table beside her, and in its reflection, she saw a woman on the threshold of a transformation that would define the rest of her existence. Evelyne lifted the goblet to her lips, paused for a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, then drank. The liquid was rich and warm, flowing through her like liquid fire and bringing with it a rush of sensations she had never experienced. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes dancing in the moonbeams. Her hearing became so acute she could detect the heartbeats of small creatures in the garden beyond, and a sense of power coursed through her veins like electricity. Adrian watched her transformation with eyes that held both satisfaction and tenderness. "How do you feel?" "Different," she whispered, setting down the empty goblet with hands that no longer trembled. "Alive, in a way I never was before." "The change is not yet complete," he said, helping her to her feet. "But the foundation has been laid. Over the coming days, you will discover abilities you never dreamed possible." As if to prove his point, she suddenly became aware of every sound in the manor, Mrs. Whitmore moving through the kitchen below, Thomas tending to something in the conservatory, even the whispered conversations of nocturnal creatures in the gardens. The cacophony should have been overwhelming, yet somehow her mind processed each sound with perfect clarity. "I can hear everything," she marveled. "Your senses will stabilize as you learn to control them. Come, there is much you need to understand about your new nature." Adrian led her from the music room to his private study, the forbidden chamber Mrs. Whitmore had shown her earlier. The ornate doors opened at his touch, revealing a space that took her breath away. Ancient books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings bearing titles in languages both familiar and unknown. Maps covered one wall, showing territories that seemed to span continents and centuries. But what captured her attention most was an ornate chalice sitting in a place of honor on the central desk. The blood chalice was magnificent, crafted from what appeared to be black, silver, and adorned with gems that pulsed like captured starlight. Even from across the room, she could sense its significance, as if it called to something newly awakened within her. "That chalice has sustained my bloodline for centuries," Adrian said, following her gaze. "Each night, it provides what we need to maintain our immortal existence. How long have you been?" She struggled for the right word. "A vampire?" He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that she almost didn't react. "I was turned in the year 1247, during the reign of Henry III. I have walked this earth for nearly 6 centuries. The number was staggering. While her ancestors had lived and died through generations, Adrian had remained constant, watching the world change around him with those silver eyes that had seen kingdoms rise and fall. "Were you alone all that time?" "Not always. Our kind exists in carefully hidden communities, bound by ancient laws that protect us from mortal discovery. I have known others of my blood, formed alliances, even loved." His expression grew distant, "But none were truly my equal until now." "What makes me different?" Adrian moved to a bookshelf and withdrew a leather-bound tome, its pages yellowed with age. "Because you were chosen long before we met. There exists among our kind a prophecy, written in the early days of vampire society. It speaks of mortals born with the capacity for our gifts, destined to join our ranks, not as servants, but as partners." He opened the book to a page marked with a silk ribbon, revealing text written in elegant script alongside intricate illustrations. The drawings showed a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Evelyne, the same dark hair, the same delicate features, even the same moonstone pendant around her throat. "This was written 400 years ago," Adrian said softly. "Yet see how perfectly it describes you." Evelyne read the ancient text, her newly enhanced vision allowing her to decipher the archaic language with surprising ease. The prophecy spoke of a woman who would come to bridge the gap between mortal and immortal worlds, who would possess both the compassion of humanity and the power of the eternal. Most unsettling of all, it described her arrival at a place of great sorrow, where she would choose love over duty and transformation over death. "You knew," she whispered, looking up at him with dawning understanding. "When you saw me at the cathedral, you knew who I was." "I had hoped," Adrian admitted. "The signs were all there, your family name, your appearance, even the circumstances of our meeting. But until you accepted the exam, dependent and drank from my cup, I could not be certain. And if I had refused, then I would have let you go and spent another century waiting for the prophecy to fulfill itself." His voice held genuine emotion. "But I confess, I am grateful you chose to stay." The implications of what he was telling her began to sink in. She had not been rescued randomly. From embarrassment, she had been claimed by destiny itself. Everything about their meeting, from Edmund's cowardly flight to Adrian's dramatic intervention, had been orchestrated by forces beyond mortal understanding. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you learn to be what you are becoming. Our kind has certain needs, certain abilities, and certain responsibilities. You will need to understand them all if you are to thrive in your new existence." Over the following hour, Adrian began her education in the ways of immortal life. She learned that vampires were not the monsters of folklore, but rather evolved beings who had transcended mortal limitations. They possessed enhanced strength, speed, and senses, along with the ability to influence mortal minds when necessary. They were not burned by sunlight, though they preferred the night, and they could eat normal food, though blood provided the sustenance that maintained their immortality. Most importantly, she learned about vampire society, a complex hierarchy of ancient bloodlines, territorial agreements, and carefully maintained secrets. Adrian held significant power within this world, his centuries of existence having earned him respect and authority among their kind. "There are others who will wish to meet you," he said as their lesson concluded. "Some will welcome you gladly, others may view your rapid ascension with suspicion. You must be prepared for both reactions." When will I meet them? Soon. Word of our union will spread quickly through vampire society. There are protocols to observe, introductions to be made. His expression grew serious. There may also be challenges to face. Not all of our kind approve of mortals being elevated to our ranks, even those chosen by prophecy. The weight of her new responsibilities settled on her shoulders like a mantle. She was no longer simply Lady Evelyne Thorne, wife to a mysterious nobleman. She was becoming something that would outlive kingdoms, witness the rise and fall of civilizations, and navigate political complexities that spanned centuries. "Are you having second thoughts?" Adrian asked, studying her expression. She considered the question seriously. Her old life had offered security but little adventure, respectability but limited freedom. This new existence promised challenges and dangers, but also wonders she had never imagined. "No," she said finally, "but I want to understand everything. If I am to be your equal in this world, I need to know its rules, its history, and its secrets." Adrian smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression seemed entirely genuine. "Then we shall begin your true education tomorrow night. There is much to learn, and we have eternity to explore it all." As they prepared to retire, Evelyne caught sight of herself in a darkened window. The reflection showed a woman transformed, stronger, more vibrant, more alive than she had ever been. The scared girl who had stood abandoned at the altar was gone, replaced by someone ready to embrace whatever destiny awaited her. The blood chalice gleamed on Adrian's desk, a reminder of the sustenance that would maintain her new existence. Tomorrow, she would begin learning to use abilities she was only beginning to understand. But tonight, she was content to marvel at the magnitude of her transformation and the possibilities that stretched ahead. The following evening brought Evelyne's first encounter with vampire society. Adrian had spent the day preparing her for what was to come, teaching her the subtle protocols and ancient courtesies that governed immortal interactions. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that complemented the moonstone pendant, now permanently warm against her throat, and felt more confident in her transformed state. "Remember," Adrian said as they waited in the great hall, "some of these beings have walked the earth longer than entire human civilizations. They value respect, but they also respond to strength. Show them you are not merely my mortal bride, but a true partner in immortal society." The first to arrive was Lady Cordelia, a striking woman who appeared to be in her 30s, but whose eyes held the depth of centuries. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of bygone eras, and her emerald gown rustled with each graceful movement. She greeted Adrian with the familiarity of old friendship before turning her attention to Evelyne. "So this is the prophesied one," Lady Cordelia said, circling Evelyne like a predator evaluating potential prey. "She certainly fits the description, though appearances can be deceiving." "Cordelia," Adrian said warningly. "Peace, old friend. I mean no offense." Lady Cordelia smiled, revealing teeth that were indeed sharper than human canines. "I am simply curious about the woman who has captured the heart of the most elusive bachelor in our community." Before Evelyne could respond, two more guests arrived. Lord Blackwood, a distinguished gentleman whose pale hair and formal bearing spoke of aristocratic breeding, and Madame Vesperia, an exotic beauty whose dark skin seemed to glow with inner light. Both moved with the same fluid grace that marked all of their kind. "Adrian," Lord Blackwood said, offering a formal bow, "we come to pay our respects to your new bride and welcome her to our society." "Your timing is impeccable," Adrian replied. "Evelyne, allow me to present some of the most respected members of our community." What followed was an evening unlike any Evelyne had ever experienced. Conversation flowed seamlessly between languages. She was surprised to find herself understanding French, Italian, even what sounded like Latin, spoken with perfect fluency. They discussed art, politics, and philosophy with the perspective of beings who had witnessed history firsthand. "I knew Michelangelo personally," Madame Vesperia mentioned casually during a discussion of Renaissance art. Temperamental man, but gifted beyond measure. He painted my portrait once, though I doubt it survived the centuries. You were fortunate, Lord Blackwood added. I sat for Leonardo da Vinci, but he became so disturbed by my unchanging appearance during the months-long sessions that he destroyed the work in a fit of superstitious terror. Evelyne found herself contributing to conversations about literature and music, discovering that her transformed mind could recall details with perfect clarity and make connections she had never been capable of before. When Madame Vesperia mentioned the evolution of musical forms over the centuries, Evelyne was able to discuss the mathematical relationships between harmonies in a way that impressed even these ancient beings. She learns quickly, Lady Cordelia observed approvingly, and her insights are surprisingly sophisticated for one so newly turned. The prophecy spoke of unusual gifts, Adrian said, pride evident in his voice. Evelyne was never an ordinary mortal. As the evening progressed, however, the conversation took a more serious turn. Lord Blackwood mentioned troubling news from vampire communities across Europe, disappearances, strange deaths, and rumors of an organized force working against their kind. The hunters grow bolder, he said, swirling the dark wine in his crystal goblet. They no longer content themselves with attacking isolated individuals. There are reports of coordinated strikes against entire bloodlines. Here, Evelyne asked, thinking of her sister Margaret and the world she had left behind. Not yet, Madame Vesperia replied, but their influence spreads. They have infiltrated mortal society more deeply than ever before, using the church and noble houses to legitimize their crusade against our kind. Adrian's expression grew grim. Have you learned anything about their leadership? Only rumors, Lord Blackwood said. They speak of a new order, led by someone who claims divine sanction for the elimination of all supernatural beings. Whoever leads them has access to ancient knowledge. They know our weaknesses, our hiding places, even our true names. A chill ran down Evelyne's spine as she remembered Sir William's panicked visit and his desperate words about her not being meant for their kind. Had he been more than just a concerned friend? Could he have been connected to these hunters? The evening concluded with formal introductions to Vampire Society protocols. Lady Cordelia explained the territorial agreements that prevented conflicts between different bloodlines, while Lord Blackwood detailed the elaborate system of favors and obligations that governed immortal politics. Madame Vesperia spoke of the ancient texts that contained vampire law and the councils that enforced those laws across continents. You will need to choose your allegiances carefully, Lady Cordelia advised as the gathering prepared to depart. Vampire society rewards loyalty, but it punishes betrayal with permanent consequences. She has already chosen, Adrian said firmly. Evelyne stands with me as I stand with her. After the guests had departed, Evelyne and Adrian retired to his study, where she found herself drawn once again to the ancient tome containing her prophecy. Reading it now with enhanced comprehension, she discovered details that had escaped her notice before. The prophecy spoke not only of her arrival, but of great trials, to come tests that would determine whether she would fulfill her destiny as a bridge between mortal and immortal worlds, or become a casualty of the eternal conflict between their kinds. Most troubling of all, it mentioned a betrayal from within her own blood, a family member who would choose duty over love and bring destruction to those she sought to protect. Adrian, she said quietly, the prophecy mentions a betrayal by family. Could it refer to Margaret? He joined her at the desk, reading over her shoulder. His expression grew troubled as he absorbed the ancient text. It is possible. Your sister has always been protective of you, perhaps even possessive. Learning of your transformation might drive her to desperate measures. She would never hurt me. She might believe she was saving you, Adrian replied gently. Mortals often cannot distinguish between salvation and damnation when supernatural forces are involved. The implications of this possibility weighed heavily on Evelyne's mind as they prepared for rest. She had gained incredible power and eternal life, but she was also discovering that immortality came with its own forms of vulnerability. The bonds that had once protected her family, loyalty, social position, even the simple anonymity of mortal existence had been severed by her transformation. Standing before the looking glass in her chamber, she studied her reflection with eyes that could now see in absolute darkness. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the abandoned bride of just days before. This Evelyne was stronger, more confident, and undeniably beautiful in an otherworldly way. But she was also alone in ways she was only beginning to understand. The moonstone pendant pulsed gently against her throat, reminding her of the forces that had shaped her destiny. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she learned to navigate her role in vampire society. But tonight, she allowed herself to marvel at the magnitude of her transformation. She had traded mortality for eternity, simplicity for complexity, and the familiar for the unknown. Whether she had gained more than she had lost remained to be seen, but she was committed to discovering the answer with all the time in the world to explore it. Adrian appeared in the connecting doorway, his silver eyes reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. "Are you content with your choice?" "I am learning to be," she replied honestly, "though I suspect contentment may be a luxury I can no longer afford." "Perhaps," he agreed, moving to stand behind her. "But you will never again face uncertainty alone. Whatever trials await us, we shall meet them together." As his arms encircled her waist and she leaned back against his chest, Evelyne realized that while she might have lost her mortal family, she had gained something equally precious. A partner who would stand beside her through whatever challenges eternity might bring. 3 weeks had passed since Evelyne's introduction to vampire society when Margaret arrived at Thorne Manor. The autumn morning brought with it a familiar carriage bearing the Ashford family crest, and Evelyne felt her heart leap with joy at the prospect of seeing her beloved sister. She had missed Margaret terribly, though she had not dared to write, uncertain how to explain the magnitude of her transformation. "She comes alone," Adrian observed from the window of his study, his enhanced vision allowing him to see details that escaped even Evelyne's newly sharpened senses. "No servants, no guards. That is unusual for a lady of her station." "Margaret has always been independent," Evelyne replied, though something in Adrian's tone made her uneasy. "She probably wanted privacy for our reunion." Adrian's expression remained troubled as they watched the carriage approach. "Perhaps, but I suggest we exercise caution. Your sister may not react well to the changes in you." When Margaret stepped from the carriage, Evelyne was struck by how worn she appeared. Her usually impeccable attire seemed hastily arranged. Her face bore the marks of sleepless nights, and her movements carried a tension that spoke of barely controlled desperation. Still, she embraced Evelyne with genuine warmth when they met in the great hall. "My dear sister," Margaret whispered, holding her close, "I have been so worried about you." "When you did not write, I am sorry," Evelyne said, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender that always clung to Margaret's hair. "I have been adjusting to married life. Everything has been so different." Margaret pulled back to study her face, and Evelyne saw her eyes widen slightly. Even to mortal senses, the changes were apparent. Evelyne's skin had taken on a luminous quality, her eyes seemed brighter, and there was a vitality about her that had never been present before. "You look remarkable," Margaret said slowly. "Marriage agrees with you." "Indeed it does," Adrian said, appearing beside them with his characteristic silent approach. "Lady Margaret, welcome to our home. I trust your journey was comfortable?" "Thank you, Lord Thorne." Margaret's voice was carefully polite, but Evelyne noticed how her sister's gaze sharpened as she studied Adrian. "I hope you will forgive my unannounced visit. I found myself unable to wait any longer to see my sister." "Family is always welcome here," Adrian replied smoothly. "Mrs. Whitmore will prepare a room for you. How long do you plan to stay? That depends on several factors, Margaret said, her tone carrying implications that made Evelyne frown. I have matters to discuss with my sister that may take some time to resolve. Over the next hour, as Margaret settled into the room Mrs. Whitmore prepared for her, Evelyne began to notice troubling details. Her sister carried a leather satchel that she guarded jealously, never allowing it to leave her sight. When Mrs. Whitmore offered to have the bag taken to her room, Margaret's refusal was sharp enough to be almost rude. More disturbing still, Evelyne caught the glint of metal beneath Margaret's travelling cloak, the outline of what appeared to be a dagger at her hip. Why would Margaret travel armed? During dinner, the tension only increased. Margaret barely touched her food, instead watching Adrian with an intensity that bordered on hostility. When Adrian mentioned his business interests, Margaret's questions became pointed, almost interrogating. You seem remarkably well preserved for someone of your age, Margaret observed, her tone deceptively casual. What do you attribute your youthful appearance to? Good breeding and careful living, Adrian replied, but Evelyne noticed how his hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his wine goblet. And your business associates, are they also so blessed with longevity? I tend to surround myself with individuals of similar constitution. Margaret's smile was cold. It must be useful to have associates who share your particular dietary requirements. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Evelyne felt her breath catch. There was knowledge in Margaret's voice, dangerous, specific knowledge that no ordinary mortal should possess. Margaret, Evelyne said carefully, what are you suggesting? I am suggesting that your husband is not what he appears to be, Margaret replied, her facade of politeness finally cracking. Just as you are no longer what you once were. Adrian rose from his chair with fluid grace, his silver eyes fixed on Margaret with predatory intensity. I think this conversation has gone far enough. Has it? Margaret stood as well, her hand moving to the concealed weapon at her side. I think we are just beginning to speak truthfully to one another. She reached into her leather satchel and withdrew an object that made Evelyne's blood turn to ice, an ornate silver dagger whose blade gleamed with unnatural light. But it was not merely a weapon. The handle bore the same mysterious symbols that decorated Thorne Manor, and the blade itself seemed to pulse with contained energy. Do you recognize this, Lord Thorne? Margaret asked, brandishing the betrayal dagger with practiced ease. It is blessed with ancient prayers and forged from silver mined in holy ground. Its touch is lethal to creatures like you. Margaret, what are you doing? Evelyne gasped, moving to place herself between her sister and her husband. I am saving you, Margaret replied, her eyes never leaving Adrian's face, just as I have been trained to do since the day you were born. Trained? The Order of Sacred Light has watched our family for generations. Evelyne, we knew this day would come. The prophecy was clear about your role in vampire society. But prophecies can be altered, destinies can be changed, if one has the will and the means to do so. The revelation struck Evelyne like a physical blow. You are a vampire hunter. I am your protector, Margaret said firmly. I have spent years learning their weaknesses, their habits, their methods of corruption. I know that what you think is love is actually supernatural compulsion, that your transformation is not a gift, but a curse that damns your immortal soul. Adrian's laugh was soft, but dangerous. You understand nothing about what your sister has become. I understand that she is lost to darkness unless I act now. Margaret raised the dagger higher, and its blade began to glow with silver fire. Step away from her, creature. Your hold over her ends tonight. The only hold I have over her is the one she gave me willingly, Adrian replied. Tell her, Evelyne. Tell your sister that every choice was yours to make. Evelyne looked between the two people she loved most in the world, her sister, who had traveled into danger to rescue her, and her husband, who had shown her wonders beyond mortal imagination. The truth was more complex than either would acknowledge. Margaret, you do not understand, she began. I chose this life. I chose Adrian. No one forced me. They never do, Margaret interrupted. That is how the compulsion works. You believe your choices are your own, but they plant thoughts in your mind, influence your emotions, make you crave what will ultimately destroy you. Then explain this, Evelyne said, moving to stand directly beside Adrian. If I am under supernatural influence, why can I think clearly enough to question your accusations? Why do I remember perfectly every conversation, every choice I made to embrace this new existence? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Margaret's features. Because you are strong. You always were. That is why the Order sent me to retrieve you before the corruption becomes complete. The Order sent you? Adrian's voice carried a note of deadly interest. You are not here as a concerned sister, but as their agent. Margaret's jaw tightened. I am both. I have loved and protected Evelyne since the day she was born. When we learned of her prophesied role, I volunteered to be the one to save her if salvation became necessary. By killing her husband? If that is what it takes to break the supernatural bonds holding her, then yes. Evelyne felt her newly awakened vampire nature responding to the threat against Adrian. Her senses sharpened to painful acuity, her strength surged through her muscles, and she found herself moving with the fluid grace that marked all of their kind. In an instant, she stood between Margaret and Adrian, her own hand extended in a gesture of protection. You will not harm him, she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised them all. Margaret's face crumpled with pain. Evelyne, please. You are still my sister, still the woman I raised and protected. Do not let this creature's influence turn you against your own blood. Adrian is not a creature, Evelyne replied firmly. He is my husband, my partner, and the man who showed me that I could be more than society expected of me. What you call corruption, I call evolution. Then you are truly lost, Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. And I have failed in the one duty that mattered most. She lowered the dagger slightly, but did not sheath it. The Order will not accept this failure. Others will come, Evelyne. Others who will not hesitate to use whatever methods necessary to complete the task I cannot bring myself to finish. Then they will face the consequences of threatening my family, Adrian said softly, and something in his tone made even Evelyne shiver. Margaret looked between them one last time, her expression showing the weight of a decision that would change everything. I came here believing I could save you. Instead, I discover that you believe yourself saved already. She straightened her shoulders with visible effort. Very well. I will not be the one to destroy what you have chosen, but others will come, and they will not show such mercy. Margaret, Evelyne began. No, her sister said firmly. I have made my choice, just as you have made yours. I only pray that someday you will understand the price of what you have gained. With that, Margaret turned and walked from the dining room, the betrayal dagger still clutched in her trembling hand. Evelyne started to follow, but Adrian's gentle touch on her shoulder stopped her. Let her go, he said quietly. This is a wound that time alone might heal. As they listened to Margaret's footsteps echo through the manor, followed by the sound of her carriage departing into the night, Evelyne realized that her transformation was complete in ways she had never anticipated. She had not only gained immortal life, she had lost her mortal family forever. The betrayal prophesied in the ancient text had come to pass, but not in the way she had expected. Margaret's love had driven her to become the very enemy she sought to protect Evelyne from, and that knowledge would haunt them both for whatever time remained to them. In the days following Margaret's departure, Thorne Manor transformed from a sanctuary into a fortress. Adrian's demeanor shifted from the cultured gentleman Evelyne had married to something harder, more ancient, a predator preparing for war. The change in him was subtle but unmistakable to her enhanced senses. His movements carried a predatory tension. His silver eyes constantly scanned their surroundings for threats, and conversations with his supernatural allies took on the urgent tone of military strategy. "How long do we have?" Evelyne asked, as they stood in Adrian's study, surrounded by maps marked with symbols she was learning to recognize as safe houses, territorial boundaries, and known hunter strongholds. "Not long," Adrian replied, tracing a route with his finger. "Margaret will report to her superiors within the week. The Order of Sacred Light does not tolerate failure, and they will view her inability to retrieve you as precisely that. They will send a larger force, better equipped, and with no emotional attachments to complicate their mission." Lord Blackwood arrived that evening, his usually composed features grave with concern. "The hunters have moved faster than we anticipated," he reported. "Lady Cordelia's estate was attacked 3 nights ago. She escaped, but barely. They came with blessed weapons and knowledge of her defenses that should have been impossible for mortals to possess." "Inside information," Adrian said grimly. "They have turned one of our kind." "Or they have always had such knowledge," Madame Vesperia suggested, as she materialized from the shadows with her characteristic grace. "The Order claims to trace its origins back to the early centuries after Christ's death. They may have been hunting us longer than we have records of their existence." Evelyne felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "This is because of me. Because I fulfilled the prophecy and joined your society, they see me as some sort of threat to their cause." "You are a threat to their cause," Adrian said, moving to place his hands on her shoulders. "The prophecy spoke of a bridge between mortal and immortal worlds. They fear what you represent, the possibility that their eternal war might end through understanding rather than extermination. Then perhaps I should... No." Adrian's voice carried absolute authority. "You will not sacrifice yourself to appease fanatics who see only monsters where we see family. We face this threat together, as we agreed when you accepted my ring." Thomas appeared in the doorway, his pale features more troubled than Evelyne had ever seen them. "My lord, we have visitors approaching, a delegation flying banners I do not recognize, but their intent seems peaceful." "How many?" Adrian asked, already moving toward the window. 6 riders, my lord. They carry no visible weapons, and one appears to be a woman of noble bearing." Adrian's enhanced vision allowed him to study the approaching party with far greater clarity than mortal sight would permit. "Vampires," he confirmed after a moment, "but not from any bloodline I recognize immediately. The woman leads them. She bears herself like nobility, but there is something different about her." They assembled in the great hall to receive these unexpected guests. Evelyne wore the midnight blue gown that had become her favorite, with the moonstone pendant gleaming at her throat. Adrian stood beside her in formal evening attire, while Lord Blackwood and Madame Vesperia flanked them as witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. The delegation that entered was unlike any vampires Evelyne had encountered. They moved with the characteristic supernatural grace, but their clothing spoke of distant lands and foreign courts. The woman who led them was striking in an exotic way, tall and elegant, with features that suggested Mediterranean heritage and eyes like polished obsidian. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, adorned with what appeared to be genuine gemstones, and her gown was cut in a fashion that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. "Lord Adrian Thorne," she said, offering a formal curtsy that managed to convey both respect and equality. "I am Countess Elisabetta Ravenna, representative of the Mediterranean Council. We come in response to troubling reports from our northern allies." "Countess," Adrian replied with a bow of equal formality, "you honor us with your presence. May I present my wife, Lady Evelyne Thorne." The Countess's obsidian eyes fixed on Evelyne, with an intensity that was both evaluating and oddly approving. "The prophesied one. You are precisely as described in the ancient texts, though they failed to capture the strength I see in you. You know of the prophecy? My dear child, that prophecy has guided vampire politics for centuries. The Mediterranean Council has been preparing for your arrival since before your great-grandmother was born. Countess Ravenna moved closer, and Evelyne caught a scent like jasmine and ancient stone. "We come bearing both an offer of alliance and a warning of what approaches." One of the Countess's companions, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and features that spoke of Spanish nobility, stepped forward, carrying an ornate wooden case. "The Eclipse Amulet," he announced, opening the case to reveal a pendant unlike anything Evelyne had ever seen. The amulet was crafted from what appeared to be black gold, set with gems that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. At its center lay a stone that shifted between deep purple and absolute black, like a captured piece of night sky. Even from across the room, Evelyne could sense the power radiating from the artifact, protective energy that made her newly awakened vampiric senses hum with recognition. "This amulet has protected vampire nobility for over 1,000 years, Countess Ravenna explained. "It was forged during the eclipse of 1147, when the barriers between our world and the realm of pure supernatural energy were at their thinnest. It will shield the wearer from any weapon blessed by mortal priests, any spell cast by human magic users, and most importantly, from the enchanted blades the hunters favor." "Why offer this to us?" Adrian asked, though his eyes remained fixed on the amulet with obvious desire. "Because the hunters who threaten you threaten all of our kind," the Countess replied. "The Order of Sacred Light has grown beyond its original mission of protecting mortals from supernatural predators. They now seek the complete elimination of all non-human, intelligent life. If they succeed in destroying you, they will turn their attention to the established vampire courts of Europe. Better to make our stand here, with the prophesied one at our side, than to fight desperate battles from positions of weakness." Lord Blackwood studied the delegation with calculating eyes. "What forces can you bring to bear?" "The Mediterranean Council commands the loyalty of over 300 vampires across Italy, Spain, and southern France," the Spanish nobleman replied. "We also maintain alliances with other supernatural beings, werewolf packs, fey courts, and even some practitioners of beneficial magic who have no love for the hunter's extremism." "When will they arrive?" Adrian asked. "They are already en route," Countess Ravenna said with a slight smile. "I took the liberty of assuming you would accept our alliance. The first contingent should arrive tomorrow evening, with the remainder following throughout the week." Evelyne felt a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. The support was welcome, but the scale of the approaching conflict was becoming clear. This would not be a simple raid or rescue attempt. It would be a full supernatural war, with Thorne Manor as the primary battlefield. "There is something else you should know," the Countess continued, her expression growing grave. "The Order has recruited immortal soldiers to supplement their hunters, men who may not fully understand what they fight, but who bring military experience and modern weapons to the conflict. They plan to lay siege to this manor, believing they can starve you out or force a confrontation on terms of their choosing." "How many?" Evelyne asked, though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer. "Our sources suggest at least 50 trained fighters, led by a core group of perhaps 12 actual hunters. They carry blessed weapons, silver ammunition, and something new devices that generate artificial sunlight, concentrated enough to cause significant harm even to our kind." Adrian's expression darkened. "Artificial sunlight. That is beyond traditional hunter knowledge. Someone has been teaching them things that should remain secret." "Indeed," the Countess agreed. "We believe they have made contact with entities from the celestial realm, angels, or their servants, who view our existence as an abomination, to be corrected." The implications of celestial involvement sent a chill through Evelyne's immortal heart. This was no longer simply a conflict between supernatural beings and mortal fanatics. It had become a cosmic struggle between different concepts of what constituted rightful existence. "When do we expect the assault?" Adrian asked. "Within days," Countess Ravenna replied. "Our scouts report significant movement in their strongholds. They are gathering for what they clearly intend to be a decisive battle. As the evening progressed, plans took shape with military precision. The manor would be fortified with supernatural defenses, escape routes would be prepared in case retreat became necessary, and communication networks would be established with allied forces positioned throughout the region. Most importantly, Evelyne would be trained in the combat applications of her developing abilities. "You have power within you that you have barely begun to explore," Madame Vesperia explained as they gathered in the conservatory for Evelyne's first lesson in supernatural warfare. The prophecy did not speak of a bridge between worlds because you would be passive in such conflicts. You were meant to be a force that could reshape the balance of power itself. Under the guidance of her immortal teachers, Evelyne discovered that her transformation had given her more than enhanced senses and eternal life. She could influence the thoughts of mortals with focused concentration, move with speed that rendered her nearly invisible to human perception, and most remarkably, channel energy through the eclipse amulet that could neutralize blessed weapons or protective spells. As the night of preparation drew to a close, Evelyne stood with Adrian on the manor's battlements, looking out over grounds that would soon become a battlefield. The eclipse amulet hung heavy around her neck, its protective power a constant reminder of the forces aligned both for and against them. "Ah, you afraid?" Adrian asked, his arm encircling her waist. "Terrified," she admitted honestly, "but not of dying. I am afraid of losing everything we have built together, of failing those who have placed their trust in me." "Then you understand what it means to be truly immortal," he replied. "It is not the absence of death that defines us, but the weight of responsibility for protecting what matters most." Tomorrow would bring the greatest test of her new existence. She would learn whether the prophecy that had shaped her destiny was a promise of triumph or merely the prelude to a more magnificent failure than any mortal could achieve. The assault began at midnight, when the new moon offered maximum darkness to both sides. Evelyne stood at the manor's highest window, the eclipse amulet pulsing against her chest as she watched torches moving through the forest beyond the estate grounds. The Order of Sacred Light had come in force, their numbers greater than anticipated, she counted. At least 70 points of light advancing through the trees with military precision. "They surround us completely," Adrian observed, joining her at the window. His pale features were set with grim determination, and he wore armor she had never seen before, black leather reinforced with what appeared to be scales from some ancient creature. No retreat is possible now. Below them, the manor's supernatural defenders took their positions. Countess Ravenna commanded the East Wing with 12 Mediterranean vampires, their movements coordinated like a deadly dance. Lord Blackwood held the West Wing with allies from the Northern Territories. While Madame Vesperia protected the main entrance with creatures, Evelyne was still learning to identify beings that moved with fluid grace, but whose forms seemed to shift in the shadows. The first attack came as a volley of crossbow bolts that streaked through the darkness like falling stars. But these were no ordinary projectiles. Each bolt glowed with divine light and left trails of silver fire in their wake. Where they struck the manor's walls, stone hissed and cracked as if touched by acid. "Blessed weapons," Adrian said, his voice carrying deadly calm. "They mean to breach our defenses with celestial fire." Evelyne gripped the eclipse amulet, feeling its protective energy surge through her immortal form. "Then it is time to discover what I am truly capable of." She moved to the balcony overlooking the main courtyard, where hunter forces were attempting to scale the outer walls. Drawing upon the power she had been practicing, she raised her hands and spoke words that came to her from some deep well of ancestral knowledge. The effect was immediate and devastating. Dark energy flowed from her fingertips, not destructive but nullifying wherever it touched the blessed weapons. Their divine light flickered and died. Crossbow bolts fell harmlessly to the ground as ordinary wood and metal, and the hunters' shouts of confusion echoed across the battlefield. "Impossible!" came a voice from the darkness, a woman's voice, filled with authority and rage. The celestial weapons cannot fail. From the shadows emerged the leader of the assault, and Evelyne's heart nearly stopped. The figure was tall and imposing, wrapped in robes that seemed to absorb light itself, but the face beneath the hood was achingly familiar. Margaret! But this was not the sister who had visited days before. This Margaret moved with supernatural grace. Her eyes blazed with silver fire similar to Adrian's, and when she raised her hand, the phoenix sword materialized in her grasp, a legendary weapon that could permanently kill immortals. Its blade wreathed in flames that burned with celestial fire. "You have been transformed," Evelyne whispered, horror and understanding flooding through her. "As have you," Margaret replied, her voice carrying across the courtyard with unnatural clarity. "The Order offered me a choice: watch my sister damn herself to darkness, or accept their blessing and gain the power to save her. I chose salvation, for both of us." Adrian appeared beside Evelyne on the balcony, his own supernatural abilities on full display. "She has been turned into a celestial hunter, part human, part divine weapon. They gave her angelic essence to match her against us. Can she be reasoned with? Look at her eyes," Adrian said grimly. "The silver fire burns away everything that once made her human. She is no longer your sister, she is their instrument of divine justice." Margaret raised the phoenix sword, and its flames illuminated the entire courtyard. "Evelyne Ashford, by the authority of the Order of Sacred Light and the blessing of the celestial host, I command you to renounce your unholy transformation and submit to purification." "I am no longer Evelyne Ashford," she replied, her voice carrying the strength of her newfound identity. "I am Evelyne Thorne, and I choose my own destiny." The phoenix sword's flames blazed higher. "Then you choose damnation, and I am bound to deliver you from it." What followed was a battle unlike anything from mortal conflicts. Margaret moved with impossible speed, the phoenix sword cutting arcs of celestial fire through the air. Where its flames touched the manor's walls, ancient stone melted like wax. But Evelyne was no longer the helpless woman who had once needed protection. She met each attack with darkness that swallowed light, power that neutralized divine blessing. Around them, the greater battle raged with supernatural fury. Vampires clashed with blessed hunters in contests of speed and strength that blurred the line between combat and deadly dance. Crossbow bolts and thrown daggers filled the air, while creatures of shadow fought beings who blazed with borrowed divine light. Lord Blackwood engaged 3 hunters simultaneously, his centuries of experience evident in every movement. But even his skill could not protect him when one produced a device that flooded the West Wing with artificial sunlight, concentrated enough to burn vampire flesh. His scream of agony echoed across the battlefield as he fell, severely wounded but not yet destroyed. In the East Wing, Countess Ravenna's forces were holding their ground, but barely. The hunters had brought siege engines that launched projectiles filled with holy water and blessed silver, creating areas of the manor that became temporarily uninhabitable to supernatural beings. The battle was being lost through attrition and superior preparation. The Order had indeed learned from centuries of conflict, adapting their methods to match vampire evolution. They fought not as desperate mortals against superior predators, but as equals, armed with weapons that leveled the supernatural playing field. Margaret pressed her attack against Evelyne with relentless determination, the phoenix sword's flames growing brighter with each exchange. "You cannot win," she called out between strikes. "Divine fire burns away all darkness. Submit, and your soul may yet be saved." "My soul was never in danger," Evelyne replied, channeling power through the eclipse amulet to deflect another blazing strike. "Only my freedom was threatened by those who would cage me in their narrow vision of righteousness." The phoenix sword swept toward her heart in a strike meant to end the conflict forever. The phoenix sword's celestial flames met the eclipse amulet's protective darkness in a collision that shook the very foundations of Thorne Manor. Light and shadow warred against each other with such intensity that the air itself seemed to crack, and for a moment time hung suspended between opposing forces. In that crystalline instant, Evelyne saw past the divine fire burning in Margaret's eyes to the sister she had always known, frightened, desperate, and convinced she was fighting for love rather than hatred. The Order had not simply given Margaret power. They had twisted her devotion into a weapon as surely as they had blessed the sword in her hands. "Margaret," Evelyne said softly, her voice somehow carrying across the chaos of battle, "this is not who you were meant to be." "I am what I chose to become," Margaret replied, but her sword arm trembled slightly. "Just as you chose darkness over light, I chose love over fear," Evelyne countered, stepping closer despite the weapon pointed at her heart. "I chose growth over stagnation, possibility over limitation. The same choice you made when you accepted their transformation, you simply chose a different form of evolution." Around them, the battle continued with supernatural fury, but something in their exchange had shifted the fundamental nature of the conflict. Adrian appeared at Evelyne's shoulder, not as a threat, but as support, while other vampires gradually ceased their attacks to watch the confrontation between sisters. "Look at yourself." Evelyne continued pulling, a silver compact from her gown, a wedding gift from Adrian that she had forgotten she carried. She opened it to reveal a mirror that showed Margaret's transformed state with brutal clarity. The reflection revealed what the celestial fire had cost. Margaret's eyes blazed with borrowed light, but her face had taken on an angular, inhuman quality. Her skin held the same pale luminescence that marked vampire nature, and her movements carried the same predatory grace. The Order had not blessed her, they had made her into the very thing she had been trained to hunt. "No," Margaret whispered, staring at her reflection with dawning horror. "They said I would retain my humanity. They promised I would be pure. They lied," Adrian said, his voice gentle despite the blade still pointed at Evelyne's heart. "Celestial transformation is no different from any other kind. It changes what you are, fundamentally. You are no longer human, Margaret. You are something new, something caught between the mortal and divine worlds, just as we exist between mortal and supernatural ones." The phoenix sword's flames began to flicker as Margaret's certainty wavered. "But I can feel the righteousness burning within me. I know that what you represent is wrong." "You feel their compulsion," Evelyne said, understanding flooding through her. "Just as they told you I was under supernatural influence, you are under celestial influence. The difference is that I chose my transformation consciously, while yours was disguised as divine blessing." From their positions around the courtyard, the hunters began to shout orders, sensing their leader's hesitation. One raised a crossbow aimed at Margaret herself, apparently. Questioning divine authority was as much a sin as embracing darkness. "They will kill you," Evelyne realized. "If you doubt their cause, they will destroy you just as readily as they would destroy us." Margaret turned to face her former allies, and for the first time, she seemed to truly see them. Men and women whose eyes held the same fanatic gleam that had once marked the most extreme priests, who carried weapons blessed by powers that demanded absolute obedience, who would murder anyone, even their own agents, who showed the slightest deviation from perfect orthodoxy. "What have I done?" Margaret whispered. "What you thought was necessary to protect someone you love," Adrian replied. "The question now is what you choose to do with that knowledge." The phoenix sword fell from Margaret's nerveless fingers, its celestial flames dying as it struck the stone courtyard. Immediately, the hunter's leader, a tall man in white robes marked with golden symbols, raised his voice in condemnation. "The weapon bearer has been corrupted by proximity to the darkness," he declared. "She must be purified through destruction. All units engage targets without discrimination." What followed was a moment of terrible clarity for everyone present. The hunters turned in their blessed weapons, not only against the vampires but against Margaret as well, revealing that their divine mission had always been about absolute control rather than actual salvation. They fired crossbow bolts that blazed with holy light at the sister who had sacrificed her humanity to serve their cause. Evelyne moved without conscious thought, placing herself between the projectiles and Margaret. The eclipse amulet flared with protective darkness, absorbing the celestial fire and neutralizing its power. But more than that, she reached out with abilities she was still discovering and spoke a single word that carried the authority of prophecy fulfilled. Enough. The word echoed with supernatural power that froze every combatant in place. Vampires and hunters alike found themselves unable to move, held by an authority that transcended both celestial blessing and supernatural compulsion. In the sudden silence, Evelyne's voice carried clearly to every corner of the battleground. "This conflict ends now," she declared, power flowing through her that seemed to come from the intersection of mortal compassion and immortal strength. Not through victory or defeat, but through understanding. She reached into her gown and withdrew 2 rings matching bands that gleamed with inner light. The eternal bond rings that she and Adrian had planned to exchange as symbols of their equal partnership. But now, she understood they had a greater purpose. "Margaret," she said, offering 1 ring to her sister, "you wanted to save me from damnation. Instead, let me offer you redemption. Not as a human, not as a celestial weapon, but as something new, a bridge between worlds, just as I have become." Margaret stared at the offered ring, understanding dawning in her transformed features. "You would trust me, after everything?" "I would save you," Evelyne replied, "just as you tried to save me. The difference is that I offer choice, rather than compulsion." Adrian took the second ring and clasped it around his own finger. The moment the bands were in place, a warm light began to emanate from both sisters, not the harsh glare of divine fire or the consuming darkness of supernatural power, but something that partook of both, while transcending the limitations of either. The hunter's leader raised his sword to strike down this new abomination, but found himself facing not 3 separate enemies, but a unified force that represented everything his rigid worldview could not accommodate. The prophecy had not spoken of a bridge between worlds. As metaphor, it had promised literal transformation of the conflict itself. Margaret reached out and grasped Evelyne's hand, accepting both the ring and what it represented. The moment their fingers touched, the battlefield erupted in light that was neither celestial nor supernatural, but something entirely new. The radiance of choice freely made, and love that transcended the boundaries others would impose. When the light faded, the war was over, though the world would never be the same. 30 years had passed since the night that transformed Thorne Manor from a battlefield into the foundation of a new world order. Evelyne stood once again in the conservatory where she had first discovered her changing nature, but now the space served a far different purpose. Representatives from vampire courts, celestial orders, and mortal governments gathered monthly within these walls, negotiating treaties and resolving conflicts through dialogue rather than warfare. The woman who looked back at her from the garden's reflection bore little resemblance to the abandoned bride who had once stood trembling at an altar. This Evelyne moved with the confidence of someone who had shaped history rather than merely survived it. Her dark hair was styled in the elegant fashion favored by immortal society, and the golden locket at her throat contained not 1 but 2 portraits, herself and Adrian, captured in a moment of perfect understanding that had endured across 3 decades. "The delegation from Rome has arrived," Margaret announced, entering the conservatory with the efficient grace that had made her indispensable as Evelyne's chief negotiator. The years had been kind to her transformed nature. She had learned to balance her celestial heritage with the pragmatic wisdom that made her formidable at the diplomatic table. The silver in her eyes had softened to something that spoke of authority tempered by compassion. "And the council's response to our proposal?" Evelyne asked, though she could read the answer in her sister's satisfied smile. Unanimous approval. The supernatural accord will be signed at tonight's ceremony, creating the first formal alliance between all non-mortal intelligences and the human governments who choose to participate. Evelyne nodded, feeling the weight of accomplishment settle around her like a comfortable cloak. The accord had taken 5 years to negotiate, but it would establish protections for supernatural beings while creating oversight systems to prevent the abuses that had led to centuries of conflict. More importantly, it recognized the fundamental principle that had emerged from her own transformation. Beings had the right to choose their nature and allegiances, whether mortal, immortal, or something between. Adrian is waiting for you in the study, Margaret continued. He has news from the Mediterranean territories. Evelyne found her husband exactly where Margaret had indicated, standing before the great window that overlooked the grounds where their new world had been born. The years had touched him gently, immortality suited him, bringing out a warmth that had been carefully hidden during his centuries of solitude. The silver in his eyes had taken on new depth, reflecting not just supernatural power, but the contentment of shared purpose. The Countess sends her congratulations, he said, handing her a letter sealed with the Gran Mediterranean Council's crest. The Southern Territories have reported a 70% reduction in supernatural violence since the Accord's preliminary provisions took effect, and the resistance movements diminishing. Most of the remaining hunter organizations have recognized that their original mission, protecting mortals from supernatural predators, has been accomplished through regulation rather than elimination. Only the most extreme factions continue to advocate for total war, and they find themselves increasingly isolated. Evelyne moved to stand beside him at the window, watching as various supernatural beings crossed the manor grounds. Vampires walked openly alongside celestial-touched humans like Margaret, while creatures she was still learning to classify conducted business with mortal representatives who showed no fear of their otherworldly nature. It was a sight that would have been unimaginable 3 decades earlier. "Do you ever regret the path we chose?" she asked, a question that had become ritual between them, not from doubt, but from appreciation of how far they had traveled together. "How could I regret the transformation of isolation into partnership?" Adrian replied, his arm encircling her waist. "You brought me more than love, Evelyne. You brought me purpose beyond mere survival. And you brought me the courage to become more than I ever imagined possible." They were interrupted by a knock at the study door. Thomas entered, moving with the same fluid grace, but now wearing formal attire that marked his role as the manor's official liaison to mortal governments. "My lord, my lady, the evening's guests have assembled in the Great Hall. President Morrison has arrived from America, and Chancellor Dubois represents the European coalition. They are eager to witness tonight's ceremony." The ceremony to which Thomas referred was more than just the signing of the supernatural accord. It was Evelyne's formal recognition as the first ambassador of integrated worlds, a position that would involve travel to supernatural courts across the globe. She had accepted the role, not from ambition, but from recognition that the bridge-building work begun at Thorne Manor needed to extend far beyond England's borders. As they made their way to the Great Hall, Evelyne paused before the portrait gallery, where her own image now hung among the ladies of Thorne Manor. But unlike those who had come before, her portrait showed not just herself, but the entire circle of beings who had shaped the new world. Adrian, Margaret, and representatives of every supernatural community that had joined their alliance. It was a portrait of partnership rather than domination, cooperation rather than conquest. The Great Hall buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, mortal and otherwise. Vampire nobility shared wine with celestial representatives, while Fae ambassadors discussed territorial agreements with werewolf pack leaders. At the center of it all, a simple wooden table bore the accord itself, hundreds of pages representing years of compromise and mutual understanding. As Evelyne took her place at the head of the table, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The frightened young woman who had been abandoned at an altar could never have imagined that her rescue would lead to reshaping the relationships between entire species. But perhaps that had been the point. Transformation required not just the courage to change, but the wisdom to embrace unexpected destinations. "Ladies and gentlemen, beings of all natures," she began, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "We gather tonight to formalize what has already begun in our hearts, the recognition that diversity of nature need not mean division of purpose." The signing ceremony proceeded with the gravity befitting its historical significance. Each representative added their name to the document, and with each signature, Evelyne felt the world shifting toward possibilities that had been unthinkable in her mortal life. When the last signature was added, she lifted the golden locket at her throat and opened it to reveal the portraits within. Adrian's image smiled back at her with the contentment of shared accomplishment, while her own face reflected the confidence that came from choosing love over fear, growth over limitation. "To all who have chosen partnership over prejudice," she said, raising a crystal goblet filled with wine that sparkled with subtle enchantment, "and to the future we build together." The toast was echoed by voices mortal, immortal, and everything in between, a harmony that spoke of unity achieved through respect for difference rather than insistence on uniformity. Later, as the last guests departed and the manor settled into peaceful quiet, Evelyne and Adrian walked once more through the rooms where their story had begun. The moonstone pendant that had marked her transformation still pulsed gently against her throat, but now it seemed less a symbol of change than of continuity, evidence that some bonds transcended the boundaries of mortality and time. "What tomorrow?" Adrian asked, as they reached the conservatory, where she had first begun to understand her true nature. "Tomorrow, we continue building the world we dreamed of," she replied, settling into his embrace with the satisfaction of work well done and love well chosen. "And perhaps we help others discover that being abandoned at one altar can lead to finding oneself at another, entirely unexpected one." Through the conservatory windows, moonlight illuminated the grounds where supernatural and mortal representatives had walked together in peace, and Evelyne smiled at the reflection of a woman who had chosen her destiny and found it good.